Well, it wouldn't be a Wednesday without some news when it comes to the Russia probe, and let's start with Michael Cohen. President Trump's former attorney, he's facing a federal investigation, as you know, over his business dealings and the payment to Stormy Daniels. And there is rampant speculation that he could flip and cooperate with the feds, especially after he said in an interview that he puts family and country first over Donald Trump. Well, Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, he had this to say about Cohen.
So you have no concerns at all about anything that Michael Cohen might tell the prosecutors?
None. As long as he tells the truth, we're home free.
Home free. Well, Cohen's new attorney, Lanny Davis, who certainly has been around the block a few times, he had a field day with that statement. By the way, Davis, he was one of Clinton's top attorneys during his own impeachment proceedings. Here's Lanny's tweet, quote, "Did Rudy Giuliani really say on Sunday shows that Michael Cohen should cooperate with prosecutors and tell the truth? Seriously? Is that Trump and Giuliani's definition of truth? Trump, Giuliani next to the word truth equals oxymoron." With the aforementioned, stay tuned. Now, Rudy, he as always had more to say, this time talking about whether or not the president will testify. Here he is.
How you can expect us to just walk up our client like a lamb going to the slaughter? We wouldn't be lawyers if we were doing it. George, he wants to testify. He believes
It's hard to believe that anymore, Ms. Mayor.
Well, it is hard to believe given all the things that have been shown about how tainted this investigation is.
So the question remains, will Mueller ask Trump to testify? And if he subpoenas Trump, what will happen if Trump just ignores it? And it speaks to the issue of presidential power. So add another layer now to that. What would happen if this goes all the way to the Supreme Court, highly conceivable, by the way, and it's a Supreme Court that has Judge Kavanaugh on the bench. Now, the nominee's stance on presidential power has evolved certainly over the years. When he was working for Ken Starr during the Clinton investigation, he aggressively went after Clinton, and the president did in fact testify. But years later, after working for President George W. Bush, his tune changed. In a 2009 Law Review article, Kavanaugh, he proposed that presidents should be provided with a temporary deferral of civil suits of criminal prosecutions and investigations. In other words, presidents can't be sued and can't be indicted while in office. Now, a piece in the Rolling Stone called "Why Brett Kavanaugh Will Carry Trump's Water" explains how Kavanaugh could impact the Russia probe if, in fact, it went all the way to the high court. Quote, "Kavanaugh already has signaled that he will be sympathetic to the president's legal position in the looming court showdown over the Russia investigation. For all we know about Trump, that may be the single most important reason why he picked Kavanaugh." Again, conjecture. But add to all of that Trump continues inexplicably to say kind things about Putin, an enemy of America who the president keeps befriending and defending even when going after allies. As we mentioned right off the top of the program here, beyond what's going on with NATO, Trump will be meeting with Putin on Monday, and every single intelligence agency that we have says Russia, in fact, tried to sway our election. Unclear whether the two men will even discuss that, and we won't know if they do. That's because Trump says it will be him and only him and a translator in the room along with a Russian premier. So a lot to unpack. And to help us do that, let's bring in former federal prosecutor Eli Honig, and he does exist in the studio with me. Thanks as always for the time.
No problem, Richard.
Well, let's start with the Russia probe. And I've said for 2 years, if you look at consistency of character, President Trump has always done things that have been beneficial to him. It has been inexplicable, not just for me, but for many, why he has gone to such lengths so often to defend Putin. So I'll do a hypothetical, again, based off nothing. Start with the Steele dossier, if you will. If there is compromise, if there is compromising intelligence that Putin has on Trump, and it's borne out in the investigation by Mueller, how does that work as to colluding, obviously, and also obstructing an investigation to keep that private? How does that work in terms of the Mueller probe?
Yeah, so like you said, Richard, it's speculative. It's been thrown out there. It could be. There's some evidence that there could be compromising information, but, you know, it's speculative. If that were to emerge, first of all, I think the Mueller investigation would be the forum for that to be discovered. And if it was, you know, just being in a position to be blackmailed is not a crime necessarily. But what it would do is it would provide a motive right? Why has Trump been so sympathetic to the Russians? Why were Trump and Manafort and Papadopoulos and all the people around him reaching out to Russians for help? Why were the Russians interested in helping? Well, why him? Why did they want Trump to win? So if those facts were to develop, I think it could flesh out some of the motives of the players.
Is it a high crime or misdemeanor for, I guess, at that point, then candidate, but subsequent commander-in-chief, to be working in the self-interest of a foreign nation against U.S. interests, i.e. a democratically elected, a democratically run election here? Is that a high crime misdemeanor?
Yeah, you know, that's a sort of mysterious passage, right, from the Constitution, and it almost doesn't even make sense itself, because high crimes are here, misdemeanors are the lowest types of crime. But you know, it would have to be, right? I mean, if we're talking about conspiracy, we've seen some of the charges that have already been brought under federal law against Manafort, Papadopoulos, you know, all the other players who've been indicted. And just to make a sort of simple comparison, if Bill Clinton could be impeached for perjury in a civil deposition, what we're talking about here with Trump is leagues beyond that.
Now, Kavanaugh, this will play out. Conceivably, there will be a vote here well prior to the midterms. All that said, if he's on the high court and he has evolving position in terms of executive power and the limits thereof, conceivably the president gets subpoenaed to testify. He ignores it, refuses, whatever it is, he doesn't go testify under oath. Then I don't think it's a stretch to say the Supreme Court's got to say what he has to do or not do and what conceivably some of the consequences could be. Kavanaugh's evolving position, I don't think I'm divining too much here, says president, whether it's civil or otherwise, can basically postpone this till he's out of office. If he's sitting in power, he can't. And it's unanswered if he believes he could even pardon himself. Could this have a major impact here? Some people say that's why he picked him. Who the heck knows? But in terms of his views on where the power starts and stops for the executive branch, could that be where we might be headed here?
Sure. I mean, I think, look, there are many issues that can conceivably end up before the Supreme Court that would have to go to the Supreme Court. You named a couple of them, right? Can a president be subpoenaed? Can a president be directly indicted? Can a president pardon himself? Any one of those questions, or all of them, could end up in front of the Supreme Court on fairly short order. You know, Kavanaugh would be one of 9 justices, so he'd be a big vote. And if you presume that the justices are going to more or less go along ideological lines, then he could be a decisive vote. I do think it's likely, though, if those questions go to the Supreme Court, that I think the Chief Justice is going to try to get more of a consensus, if not unanimity. If you look historically, when the Supreme Court decided the Nixon tapes case, first of all, 4 of those justices had been appointed by Nixon and didn't need to recuse, and the decision came down unanimous. Same thing in the Clinton, Paula Jones. The court, I think, for its own institutional standing, felt it was important to come out unanimous. So I would kind of hope, in a way, that the court here would see the importance of this issue and say, this is going to really undermine public confidence if we come out 5-4 along party lines.
And again here, the Constitution, the Founding Fathers, explicitly intended that we didn't have one branch of government that superseded all others, and in fact had a glorified monarchy here. The idea was we had co-equal branches, and the judiciary was separate but yet equal to the executive branch. The idea was that, you know, a president wasn't a king, right?
Right. I mean, and you see that here. You know, the president gets to make the appointment, the Senate has to approve it, and then the judiciary can have say over certain things that the executive does. So, yeah.
All right. To other developments, I mentioned a few in the windup here. Cohen and Lanny Davis. Now, you read this one of 2 ways. Lanny Davis doing his job, representing his client, but also sending a clear message, you know, you better take care of my guy here, or my guy's got a story to tell. How do you divine that?
Yeah, all the signs are here of cooperation, all of them. I mean, start with Cohen changing his lawyers, right? That's always a red flag. That means that Cohen's getting out of this, whatever joint defense agreement there may have been. Then Cohen goes and hires not just Guy Petrillo, who's was my supervisor at Southern District, knows exactly what he's doing in the criminal law sphere. Lanny Davis is one of the very small handful of attorneys on the planet who's lived through an impeachment proceeding, right? As you mentioned before, he represented Bill Clinton in the 90s in that impeachment proceeding. Throw on top of that the statements that Cohen made in the interview with Stephanopoulos. I mean, you know, talking about my loyalty sits with my family, that's the biggest tell of all. I mean, that's ultimately what it comes down to for any cooperator.
When will he know if he is cooperating, if he hasn't already? Yeah,
not to put too much intrigue on it, he could be already. I mean, if I'm sitting in Southern District, as I was a few years ago, you have to do the dance with the lawyer, but if he's ready to debrief, I'd be debriefing him right now, and I wouldn't be walking him into the steps of 1 St. Andrews. That would be too obvious. We'd be setting up a hotel or an FBI safe house or some discreet out of line of sight location. So they could be debriefing him right now. The moment when we will know for sure will be when Michael Cohen goes into court and takes his plea, and that will be to an information. An indictment is the sort of involuntary way of getting charged. An information means I agree to be charged in this manner. So that's typically when cooperation would become public.
Lee, as always, thank you so much. Good
Thanks,
to see
Richard.
you.
Anytime.
All right, coming up next, if and when Judge Kavanaugh joins the High Court, it will have a seismic shift. Consequence. Constitutional law expert will join me next. We'll look at how much things could actually change.